Hi, this is Dr. P to talk for a while about science fiction, fantasy, and other imaginary worlds in war games. Now, there can still be a history even if it's not reality. There are many imagined worlds that are quite detailed. For example, Tolkien's Middle-earth, Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time, Dresden Files, The Lost Fleet, Asimov's Foundation, and so on. Though few of these have historical appendices like Tolkien's. What you're striving for here is not so much for realism, because it's not real. It's for verisimilitude, the appearance of being real or true, feeling true to the fiction. This can be expressed both in the details and actual mechanics and in the feel of the game. Now I go for the details and the mechanics and figure the feel will go along. But I remember not too long ago watching a game of Ankh-Morpork about a city in Terry Pratchett's Discworld. I thought, this isn't at all how things worked in the city, but one of the players thought it felt much like the city. So it may not have been a good model, but it worked well for her. Now, licensing IP is the problem here. In other words, making a game that uses characters, story, or other recognizable elements from an artistic work, a book, a play, a film, a painting, a sculpture, a musical work, and so forth. The simplest thing to say is stay away from this rat race. In many cases, if it's a big IP, it's not even worth the cost of the paperwork and lawyers for the IP owners to license to a well-known publisher, let alone to an individual designer. If it's a big company, then maybe something will happen. Fantasy Flight Games, for example, has based much of their success on licensing IP and creating games. Furthermore, games based on licenses have a poor reputation, especially those based on movies. Part of the reason for that is the game is usually expected to come out when the movie comes out, and so often it's rushed. Now, I happen to have some experience in this area with Middle-earth. I propose a Britannia-like board game of the history of the Third Age of Tolkien's Middle-earth, that is, before the War of the Ring. So each of 4 players would control both good and bad nations. The Britannia system is a natural for turning what seems to be a two-sided situation into something for more than two. Tolkien provides some of the history of the Third Age in The Lord of the Rings, but mostly it's in the appendices. I designed a prototype and I played it once solitaire. Then I talked to Roberto at Nexus at the time, who was co-designer and co-publisher of the very successful War of the Ring game. He knew that the Tolkien game license was held by Sophisticated Games in the United Kingdom, who were mainly a distributor. But when Roberto talked to them, he reported that the appendices of The Lord of the Rings were officially not part of the game license. Now that's the case even though the movie and other game makers have clearly used those appendices in some situations. And of course, at this time, 2008, the Hobbit movies were coming up, and the license was likely to be more expensive because of that. But those movies are now done. Few companies are now publishing Tolkien games. Roberto has a new company that does publish such games, and I'm working on a Third Age game in hopes that he can get a license. Now, if you're not doing something that's a license, you have fewer constraints. The fantasy and science fiction games that don't represent a particular IP let you design what you want, more or less. That's why I'm attracted to them. I especially like space war games. So there are lots of space war games at all scales, from ship to space empires. And there's lots of fantasy games. How well do they sell? Well, I get mixed opinions about this and have no definitive answer. It depends on the publisher's experience. It depends on a lot of things. Some like space war games, some don't. Some think fantasy sells, some don't. I feel that fantasy games are more likely to be role-playing games, and science fiction are more likely to be board games or board game like XCOM. Since I'm not somebody who wants to write a set of role-playing game rules, then I gravitate a little bit to space war games. But my game Dragon Rage, which did originate from the early 1980s, is very much a fantasy game, dragons attacking a city. So it's a matter of personal preference in the end. Now I'm going to throw a little bit in here as a digression. If you do historical games, World War II is far more popular than any other history. In the case of science fiction and fantasy games, I can't say anything definitive like that, but in historical, World War II is way ahead.